Good morning. My name is Kenny Singh. I'm the cybersecurity lead for the partner organization Microsoft Australia. Today, I'll actually take a moment to describe the end-to-end Microsoft security story as it actually extends across users, devices, applications, and data. We've actually seen a very, very significant shift in the industries, in various industries across the globe. This shift is sometimes known as digital transformation, and security is a very fundamental piece in this digital transformation. The key themes that have actually emerged out of this digital transformation trend are basically mobility and cloud. So those are the catalysts, significant factors that are actually expediting the digital transformation journey for lots and lots of organizations. What those trends mean though, what those catalysts mean though, is that the technology landscape across the globe is actually changing very rapidly. Whereas organizations used to confine their data to their own premises once upon a time, or machines that were actually directly managed by the organization. Now the same organizations are actually allowing or are required by their users to allow themes like bring your own devices, which basically means that users bring their own devices into the organization, and the devices may or may not be in any kind of control of the organization. We're also seeing themes in working anywhere. So not necessarily do people actually work on corporate managed devices in corporate networks. People work these days from any location and on any device for that matter. We also used to see in the old world that applications were completely approved and sanctioned by the respective organizations before their users could actually use those applications. But that's not the case right now. To be productive, users actually use a range of applications in the cloud on their mobile devices, which may or may not be sanctioned by the organization. So with all these different trends and all these different themes, we actually needed to rethink security from a Microsoft product and services standpoint, and for the third-party ecosystem of apps and services we actually support through Azure Active Directory. So we believe we've actually come up with quite a comprehensive solution that basically addresses the needs of the modern world in any mobile device, any app, on any device, anywhere. So over the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll actually walk you through what that security story actually looks like. So here on this slide, we actually have 4 different areas. So in thinking about security, these are the 4 different areas that we've actually focused on. This is where all our investment in the security portfolio that we actually have at Microsoft is being focused on. These areas are identity and access management, threat protection, information protection, and intelligent security management. Over the next few slides, we'll first walk through identity and access management, then we'll actually follow that by threat protection, followed by information protection, and then finally intelligent security management. So what really does identity and access management mean? Those threats, those themes that I was actually alluding to before, the themes of mobility, any mobile device and any app and any device, and the cloud, any application in any cloud for that matter. They required us to sort of rethink how we protect organization from a user's devices, apps, and data perspective. We could not think about network security any longer because the concept, the notion of a network has actually expanded quite rapidly. It's not about corporate locations anymore. So the theme that basically emerged was identity, protecting at the front door. So this is a theme you'll actually hear quite a lot when we talk about our security story. So protecting at the front door, what that basically means is that a user might come from any mobile device, or they actually might come from any location, or they might be wanting to access any app, but they're always going to have a step in that whole flow, in that entire life cycle, where the user basically logs on to the service that they actually want to access data from. That's where the identity and access dimension becomes very, very important and significant. So if we protect at the front door through identity and access management, what are some of the capabilities and features we needed to think about, we needed to make available to the market that basically addressed that whole paradigm across different mobile devices and across different apps and across different locations? So there's a range of features in identity and access management that we've actually focused on in all the work that we've actually done. One of the most significant features is what you actually see on the slide now. It's conditional access. The whole paradigm of conditional access is centered around balancing security with productivity. Let's take a couple of examples. Is it really productive for users to actually be required to do multi-factor authentication every single time they actually access a corporate application, whether the user is on a managed device or in the organization's sanctioned locations or not? Or will that actually result in a multi-factor authentication fatigue? We think it's the latter. So what conditional access actually allows you to do is to basically define a predefined set of conditions, right? As the name indicates. So these conditions could actually be things like where the user is logging on from, so the location. So you can actually define IP ranges, which basically say these are the sanctioned locations or the trusted location for the organization. It could actually be conditions around the device compliance and health. So whether the device is compliant, whether the device is managed, or whether the device is domain joined. It could actually be something that hinges on the risk associated to that sign-in activity. So as the user signs on to a specific application, what is the risk associated to that activity? We call it risk-based conditional access. So risk-based conditional access, it actually takes into consideration a whole range of variables. And based on those variables, it basically assigns a user a risk score. The risk score can actually be low, medium, or high. And it's actually calculated on a whole raft of variables, as I mentioned before. For example, a user logs in from Melbourne, and then 15 minutes later, the same user with the same identity logs in from Sydney. Our systems will actually see that as an impossible travel scenario, and that will actually elevate the user's risk level. We actually have a lot of smarts built into the system. It's a learning system. So what that basically means is, let's assume for 1 second that the same user authenticates from Melbourne, and then the same user within 15 minutes authenticates from Sydney. And there's a multi-factor authentication prompt that's actually been set on the user, that's required by the policy defined by the organization, that, you know, let's assume for 1 second that the risk level is medium in this case. If the risk level is medium, you can actually define an action through the conditional access framework, basically saying, if the risk level is medium, the person actually has to do multi-factor authentication. The user has to do multi-factor authentication. Now let's assume for 1 second that this event that was basically triggered, this risk event, was actually something that was perfectly legitimate. So for example, the user logged in from Melbourne, but there is a specific business case for the user then proxying through a specific firewall that basically makes the user appear to Azure Active Directory as a user coming from Melbourne. In that case, the user will be prompted for multi-factor authentication, and when the multi-factor authentication is successfully executed, the user will basically be logged into the system, and the learning from that system around that event actually not really being a risk event, because the user was actually able to successfully authenticate to the system with multi-factor authentication, will be recorded, and in subsequent logon attempts will actually be taken into consideration. So that's just one example of how we actually use machine learning and artificial intelligence to basically build a lot of smarts into the system to have a very healthy balance between security and productivity. There are a couple of key other features and capabilities we actually have in an identity and access management story. There's the self-service password reset capabilities, so we actually give a very easy way for users to reset passwords in the cloud. Multi-factor authentication, obviously, so you can enforce multi-factor authentication through this conditional access framework, but what you can also do is you can basically require multi-factor authentication for every single user in your organization and for every single logon attempt if you actually so wish. The ultimate vision for identity and access management, before we actually switch to the next subject, the next topic of threat protection, is to basically have a world where passwords are actually not required anymore, because passwords are inherently insecure. We've actually made some significant strides towards that world. We actually have a technology called Windows Hello for Business that's basically based on an international standard called FIDO 2.0. Which lots of our other competitors and key players in the digital transformation space are also a part of. That basically gives you seamless access to thousands of SaaS applications without requiring a password. Once you've logged onto your machine, you'll just have single sign-on access to thousands and thousands of applications, which also includes Office 365 and Box and Dropbox and the main SaaS apps out in the industry. We do understand that passwords are a reality for now. So we have significant investments in ensuring that passwords are secure. So conditional access framework was actually one of them. Even if the identity is compromised through conditional access, you can actually force incremental controls like multi-factor authentication and resetting passwords and limiting access to applications and so on and so forth. We also offer you privileged identity management, which basically is a set of capabilities to safeguard admin credentials. So you basically only assign admin privileges for a predefined amount of time, and once that time is finished, the admin privileges are actually revoked from the user account. So that actually helps you safeguard your identities in usernames and passwords today, with a view to move into this world where there are no passwords and everything just has seamless single sign-on once you've actually logged onto your device through biometrics and multi-factor authentication. So with that, we'll actually move to the next topic, and that's threat protection. What we're actually seeing in the industry is a very, very significant surge in the amount of threats that are actually being executed successfully on organizations. WannaCry was one of the examples of such a threat. Attackers are actually coming in through malware. Attackers are coming in through backdoors in software. But one of the most significant statistic is that 81% of the attacks are in one way or the other linked to compromised credentials. With our threat protection story, we actually offer you a range of products that actually span threat protection on premises, in the cloud, and that's a Microsoft cloud, and the clouds from other vendors out in the industry. This slide actually shows you a snapshot of all the threat protection technologies we actually have in place. On premises, we have advanced threat analytics, which basically constantly monitors your network for any malicious activity or any activity that basically does not fit in with our behavioral models. I'll just spend 30 seconds on that very quickly, just to describe what that basically means. So malicious activities are things like pass-through hashes. Like, for example, sometimes hackers will actually pick up tokens that were issued to a user after a successful authentication, and then they'll actually use those tokens to log on to different applications. ATA and its counterpart in the cloud, Azure Advanced Threat Protection, are actually going to detect a threat like that. When we talk about behavioral model violations, what that basically means is that user X, as an example, only accesses a specific application from specific machines and from specific locations. If we actually see user X doing something which is quite significantly different from what the behavioral model actually indicates, we'll actually treat that as a suspicious event, and the admins will get flagged when that kind of an event gets detected. So it actually gives you protection, to recap, against malicious activity, things like pass-through hashes, malicious activities that hackers generally indulge in, violations of the behavioral model that we've actually created, and a range of security events as well. So that's advanced threat analytics, which protects you on premises. Azure ATP gives you the same protection in the cloud, and it also works in a hybrid environment. So you can actually protect your on-premises environment with Azure ATP as well. Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection offers you threat protection across your SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Exchange Online services in Office 365. So it actually protects you against attachments that might potentially contain malware. It actually has advanced detection in it, so it'll take an attachment that's sent through an email, it'll spin up a virtual machine in the background, and it'll actually take that attachment then in a runtime scenario in what we call a detonation chamber, and it'll actually run that attachment to see whether there's any malware that actually manifests or surfaces when that attachment is run. So it basically tests to see whether there's a malware in that attachment, not just at rest, but at runtime, which is extremely important these days. It also protects you against unsafe links to protect you against phishing campaigns. So for every link that's actually sent to you via an email, it'll actually rewrite the link for you, so that when you click that link, the destination is scanned before you're actually allowed through to that link. So it actually gives you real-time click-through protection. That's Office 365 ATP. Whenever we actually talk about the third-party app ecosystem, Box and Dropbox and G Suite and Amazon Web Services and Salesforce and so on and so forth, you'll always see us mention our cloud access security broker called MCAS. This actually protects, this gives you the same level of threat protection, but this time in the context of third-party SaaS applications. You'll also hear us mention MCAS when we actually talk about the information protection story. So before we move on to the information protection story, I just wanted to land a couple of messages. One, we actually have a very complete threat protection story that spans on-premises, in the Microsoft cloud, and across the ecosystem of third-party SaaS apps. This is a security story. This is a set of products that's very deeply integrated with other Microsoft technology. For example, if we actually detect that there was a phishing campaign or a malware campaign executed against you, against a customer's environment in their Office 365 tenancy, through connections with Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection on premises, will actually give you a view of what Windows devices were also infected as a result of those malware campaigns and phishing campaigns. So with that, we'll actually move to the third section, which is information protection. So information protection is all about ensuring that data from the time that it's actually created to the time that it's destroyed is protected at all times. Once again, alluding to the old world. In the old world, data was actually controlled in the confines of an organization with policies that basically mandated that that data in certain situations and circumstances could not be removed from corporate managed devices. For example, we've seen in lots of very large and complex and compliant organizations, organizations where regulations or complying to industry regulations is absolutely mandatory. We've actually seen them blocking the use of USB sticks that actually don't belong to the organization. So that's the world we come from. Those kind of policies are actually not policies that can stand up in the world of today, with all the themes that we've actually already discussed. So we have an information protection strategy that basically gives you coverage across the entire plethora of information creation and lifecycle stages. And I'll actually just walk you quickly through those different phases. So there's 4 phases that actually compose the information protection journey. There's the detect phase, there's the classify phase, there's the protect phase, and then there's the monitor phase. So let's quickly walk through these phases. So detection is all about ensuring that you're actually aware of the sensitive information that actually exists in your organization. Classification is ensuring that once you've detected the sensitive information or the nature of information in your organization, you're actually able to appropriately classify it with labels that actually indicate the nature of that information. Protection is then taking those labels and putting policies in place that actually safeguard the life cycle of the information. And monitoring, finally, is to basically give you a view of what that information looks like as it actually travels through its life cycle. So for example, how does the information appear from the time it was created to the time it was retained to the time it was destroyed? Or for sensitive content, how does the information appear throughout its life cycle from an access perspective? So who accesses it, from what device, and so on and so forth. So there are a range of technologies that you actually see on this slide that actually make up the information protection story. We actually have Azure Information Protection that basically sits at the heart of all of this. Azure Information Protection basically gives you the ability to label content, to classify content, and then protect content. So let's talk about the technology in the context of these 4 different phases. For detection, we actually give you a tool called AIP Scanner. Once again, in line with our view or our strategy to address your on-premises requirements, requirements in the Microsoft cloud, and requirements, information protection requirements in the third-party clouds. We actually give you AIP Scanner that basically allows you to discover the nature of content on premises. We give you Office 365 Data Governance that allows you to detect the nature of content in Office 365. We give you CAS, MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security, that allows you to detect the nature of content in third-party SaaS applications. So once again, a very complete story. Then if we move to classification, you can actually classify content that's stored on premises through Azure Information Protection connectors. You can classify content that's stored in Office 365. And once again, you can actually classify content that's stored in third-party SaaS applications through Cloud App Security. And then when we actually get to the protection layer, we offer you quite a few different stages and phases of protection. So you can actually protect information at a device level. We actually give you Intune for mobile device management and mobile application management. In Windows, we actually give you Windows information protection that actually allows you to apply device level protection, information protection policies at a Windows level. We give you mobile application management, which basically allows you to protect the information as it actually travels through iOS devices and Android devices and Windows 10 devices that have Windows information protection in it. So for example, even for those devices that are in the BYOD scenario, which the organization does not directly manage, you can basically apply policies to those devices, application policies to those devices, which basically containerize those applications. So for example, you can actually access an organization can actually put in place a policy that basically says all the documents stored in SharePoint Online, they're accessible on a user's device that is not directly managed by the organization. But whenever the user actually opens one of the organization's documents from SharePoint Online or from any other protected location in Word, Excel, PowerPoint as an example on an iOS device, the user will actually not be able to copy content out of those documents and paste that into an app like WhatsApp as an example. So you can actually put those policies in place. So suffice it to say, a very comprehensive device level information protection policy. Then you can actually apply protection policies at an Office 365 level. So we actually have a very robust capability, DLP capability in Office 365. So you can actually stop information from being shared that is sensitive. As an example, you can actually put notifications in place that inform admins as information is traveling through its life cycle and certain events are happening which basically violate your data loss prevention policies. And you can actually implement the same protection paradigm in third-party SaaS applications as well through MCAS. So through MCAS, you can actually implement very similar policies around stopping the sharing of sensitive content outside your organization in applications like Box and Dropbox and so on and so forth. We also give you, finally, a very robust way to protect email. So through Office 365 message encryption, you can basically protect email to the extent that you can define policies that basically say only a predefined set of users can actually access this email at any given point in time. And unless the user presents that specific identity that you actually protected that message with, that message will actually be completely encrypted and invisible to the user. That was information protection. So once again, a very, very complete information protection story. If I may actually just take 30 more seconds and describe the final aspect of information protection, which is monitoring, before we actually get into this slide of intelligent security management. So monitoring is all about viewing the life cycle of the information, as I actually mentioned earlier. So we give you a nice monitoring dashboard that basically shows you a view of your sensitive information and who's accessed that sensitive information and a whole raft of metadata about that access, like for example, what devices and so on and so forth. Okay, so that actually brings us to the final topic, that's intelligent security management. So intelligent security management is basically the glue that actually brings all of the things that we talked about thus far together. So I'm just going to fast forward to this slide here. So this slide talks about the intelligent security graph. So this is the central glue. This is the central glue or the central component of intelligent security management. The intelligent security graph is a massive repository of security information. It contains billions and trillions of signals from a range of applications. So you can actually see a few descriptors for the kind of signals that go into the intelligent security graph. We have over 450 billion authentications happening against our corporate and consumer identity systems across the globe. We actually have over 200 plus consumer and commercial SaaS applications or applications in general that are basically being powered by Azure Active Directory or our consumer directory system. All these signals are actually flowing into the Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph. So let's take an example of that. Let's assume for 1 second that you have a user X that's trying to log on to a machine. And after a successful log on, user X actually attempts to access a specific application that's powered by Azure Active Directory. And user X basically presents an IP address to our subsystem that's deemed malicious, or through that sign-in event has actually been deemed as high risk or malicious. Now that malicious IP information is actually going to flow into the Intelligent Security Graph data warehouse, and from that point on, that malicious IP address is actually going to be available to every single system that's powered by the Intelligent Security Graph. For example, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Cloud App Security, and so on and so forth. So it's the central repository that basically records all the intelligence, all the security intelligence across the globe. It also contains a whole raft of information from our digital crimes unit about botnet data. It contains information from law enforcement organizations about malicious IP addresses, machines, actors, locations, and so on and so forth. And we bring all of that information in context when a sign-in activity actually happens, or when a malware campaign or a phishing campaign is executed against your organization, all in context to actually protect your organization. So this slide here, this actually shows you the different components and how the Intelligent Security Graph actually powers these different components. So suffice it to say, it is at the heart, the Intelligent Security Graph, or the ISG, is at the heart of all the security intelligence that we actually have built into a plethora of security services that we actually have in the market today and offer our customers. So if I can please just leave you folks with one message, and that is this, that the scale that the Intelligent Security Graph actually presents, that scale is unparalleled in the industry. So it's not just a matter of detecting and protecting you against local threats. We actually bring the intelligence, the security intelligence from across the globe to actually protect a customer's context in a customer's environment at every single sign-in event and access event, and at every single stage of the information protection lifecycle. Okay, so finally, this slide actually presents all the different products and capabilities we actually have available, categorized by the different areas of security across identity and access management, threat protection, information protection, and intelligence security management. It's a very comprehensive story that spans, as I mentioned before, the on-premises world, the Microsoft ecosystem in the cloud, and all third-party ecosystems that are actually powered by Azure Active Directory or integrated with Azure Active Directory. If you have any further questions, I'm Kenny Singh, kenny.singh@microsoft.com. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.